Hello and welcome to a new year. It is Monday, January 2nd, 2023. And it's kind of interesting how at the end of a calendar year, we usually lose someone notable. This past week, we lost Pele, the soccer star, at the age of 82. Retired Pope Benedict also passed away at the age of 95. And then finally, as is fitting with Venus together with Pluto and Capricorn, we lost a very notable lady last week, Barbara Walters, who passed away at the age of 93. She's had an extraordinary career, blazed trails for many women on television and women journalists. And so I was wondering, what about her chart tells us that she would have such an extraordinary career? We see from her chart that she was born a Libran. Interesting, she was born in the year 1929, which was kind of an interesting year for extraordinary women. That year we saw Jacqueline Kennedy, who was at that time Jacqueline Bouvier, born. The future Princess Grace of Monaco was born that year. Also, we see that Barbara Walters herself, and Audrey Hepburn was also born that year. But Barbara Walters herself did not become a famous actress, but she did become just as famous in her career as a television journalist. And so we see that in 1929, when she was born, Pluto was in Cancer and in her 10th house. So she was born into a very patriarchal society. And she was going to have to make her way as a woman, as a single woman, much of her life, in a career that had been almost exclusively dominated by men. But that she could somehow get herself in the door is shown by this sun, which was rising when she was born. It's just 4 degrees away from her ascendant in Libra. And ordinarily we think, well, the sun in Libra is in its fall. And so it actually needs that connection to shine. And how interesting it is that in her chosen career, Barbara Walters was able to rise to the top as someone who was able to converse with other people and get them to talk with her. In fact, one of her books is called How to Talk with Practically Anybody About Practically Anything. So she actually learned to shine through conversations with others. And we see also that sun is in opposition to Uranus over here in Aries. And so she was a trailblazer, that she was not just talking with people in her own living room, but she was actually doing it in a television studio and doing it as a career. And notice that the sun and ascendant square that midheaven up here in Cancer, with Uranus creating the final leg of a T-square. So that she would have to step up and really demand her place at the table and not take no for an answer. But that conflict constantly is something that she was able to work on throughout her career, and continue to create new opportunities for herself and then for other women to follow. And so those are some interesting, just kind of to get us started thinking about what made Barbara Walters' career so extraordinary. Also, if we look at that Libran sun, it's ruled by Venus, which is in Leo. And so that the ruler of this sun, the ruler of her chart, has mutual reception. So this 11th house of Leo, that she's able to shine, within a group, within a network, among friends, is definitely indicated here. And one of her most famous groundbreaking shows in her career was The View, where she and other women would talk together about different topics. And that became a huge success because the 11th house, remember, is also the audience. So through doing her conversations, her talking, her relating to others, her connecting, she's able to build an audience and truly shine. So you can see those are some indications of an extraordinary career. Also, what's the planet that rules her career? It's that moon in curious Gemini, not too far away from Jupiter, both in the ninth house of higher knowledge. So she would have just a deep curiosity about people, places, things. The essence of charm, really, if you meet somebody who you just find so charming, is often that they're very curious about you and very interested in what you're thinking and doing. And so that she was able to turn that curiosity into a career is really also indicated in this chart. And notice also what's happening to that moon. Its own ruler, Mercury, is in trine to it, with Mars not far away. So she was able to, through that first house Mercury, her communication skills, tap into that sense of curiosity and really fly with it. Also notice that Mercury has stationed, and so that makes it louder in the chart. And so that she's going to be someone who asks a lot of questions and is very intently interested in the answer is indicated by this position. And also notice that Mercury in the first house is in its joy. It loves to be in this first house where it can kind of go out into the world and gather information and come back into the world and into the self and process it. So that Gemini mercurial energy is someone who not only can go out into the world and kind of reap a lot of information, but they're able to kind of bring it back in and process it and put it together in a way that makes sense to them and that can be explained to everyone else. With the malefic Mars right there on Mercury, you think, okay, she was someone who could ask the tough questions. She didn't shy away from asking people sometimes very personal things about their lives. One of her most famous interviews was with Monica Lewinsky, the White House intern, and who was very uncomfortable talking about her experiences in the Clinton White House on a public level until she sat down one-on-one with Barbara Walters and had a very insightful conversation with her. In fact, I was reading that conversation led to a lifelong friendship between the two women. So that Mars coming here, which normally can kind of sharpen that Mercury and make you more argumentative, but because it's in, the softer sign of Libra, because it's in trine to that moon, because that Mercury is stationed and very strong in the first house in its joy, I think that Mars worked to her favor in many cases. The only time when it didn't was there was a time in her career she had been a daytime talk show host, and she was moved up to be the news anchor at ABC News. And so that's where we come back to this patriarchal Pluto in her 10th house. Harry Reasoner, who was the nightly news anchor at that time, did not want a co-host, was very cold and standoffish with her, made it a very tough experience for her. And she eventually moved on to work at the ABC News magazine 2020. So that's kind of interesting that she's got, her fighting spirit, that sense of I'm going to blaze trails for women. But when she came up against the patriarchy, she suffered a setback in her case. And I love that, her eventual really stellar success on television came with The View, a show about women, by women, women talking about women's issues. And so that brings back that lovely trine of Mercury and Mars to that moon, her career planet. And she also then was, if you look at this group on The View, she was interested in Gemini, a very divergent group with different points of view. And so she was able to really take that Mars here, working with her Mercury, trine that moon to generate this kind of energy where women didn't really always agree with each other. In fact, they frequently disagreed with each other, but yet could create a lively and entertaining discussion. So Barbara Walters retired at her Pluto opposition. This is something that up until her generation, people had not experienced. Just by the way, Pluto moves through the zodiac. Oftentimes, we don't live long enough to have a Pluto opposition. But as the Pluto opposition was approaching in 2014-15, she did retire. Also, that would have been the time of her Uranus return when she was 84. So that she had this amazing longevity is definitely indicated in her chart by just that stability of her moon with that trine to Mars and Mercury. But also there's one other aspect in there that is that moon is in opposition to Saturn. And Saturn itself is well aspected to that Mars and Mercury. So that gave her that staying power that people could try to knock her down, but she got back up. Also, we see, Saturn in Sagittarius, the communicator in her third house. So she was able to keep her mind lively and keep discussions going and stay current, that lovely Gemini quality of being able to stay always with what's up and what's going on, really until she got to the point of her Uranus return. And then I think eventually that third Saturn return, when Saturn was in Sagittarius, was probably what finally put her in a position where she felt she was no longer able to continue with her career. But also, just another interesting side note about Barbara Walter, she grew up with a sister who was disabled. And from an early age, she was the one who really took care of her sister. Her sister's name was Jackie. And so you can see that Saturn, which shows difficulties, which can be overcome because she's a day chart. But in her third house, opposite that moon. So Saturn moon would often suggest early responsibilities. And that was certainly the case with her. And in fact, later on, Barbara Walters, again, that Saturn opposite moon, was unable to bear children of her own. And so she adopted a daughter. So you see that lovely Venus, which is in the house of other people's children, is in a nice trine to that Saturn, so that she was able to find her daughter through adoption. And that daughter was also named Jackie for her sister, and was probably the most important person to Barbara Walters throughout her life. If you just are kind of curious about her passing, she has been, of course, having Uranus going over this North Node Chiron. So Chiron with the North Node would indicate some health problems that are being dealt with, I would think. But eventually, as that North Node is returning to its original place, which it's just about ready to do now, could show, especially in her 8th house here with Chiron, maybe a weakening of her physical constitution. I love, though, that Jupiter is here on her descendant and squaring that midheaven. So bringing Barbara Walters, who's been kind of away from the public eye for a number of years since her retirement, bringing her back into our minds and our consciousness. Her picture is on TV, and clips of her are being shown, and she's being honored, certainly in the way she deserves to be honored, for giving so much of her gifts and talents to us, and also for paving the way for so many women who are succeeding in what was once almost an exclusively male-dominated profession. So thank you very much for joining me to take this look at Barbara Walters' chart, and I look forward to seeing you again next week, and I hope that you have a star-studded week. Thank you. Bye.